I'm going to do a full playthrough of Liferoot Forest on NM4 solo using Gilthane's Liferoot build. It'll be slightly modified from what he does, but it'll still be at the core his build. I'll be doing this with a Trapping Huntress with Elemental Chaos Uber, a DPS Huntress for anti-air and general plane, a Frosty Apprentice, and a Walling Squire. There will be no monk in this build. You can find his updated build with monk in Gilthane's guide, which I will link below. But this is his old build and works better if you have a DPS Huntress in your deck versus someone that didn't go a DPS Huntress. If I was using a monk, I would use my build that I already have, but this is a monkless build, as I said. I'll do another video that goes more just over the build, as this is a full playthrough. You'll have a little bit of room to change things too. There's kind of, I think, 40 DU left at the end that you can play with. I'll show you what I do with it versus what Gilthane's recommends in his guide. I can kind of explain it briefly. He likes to use 3 traps in front of these 2 sidewalls. I prefer to use 4 on each wall. This build is better aimed when you don't have a split middle either. I have double magic mid like here, so this will work better with this. So I like 4 here. This is not a bad starting build. It's a little bit harder than if you use a monk in my opinion, because you kind of need to have a strong DPS character. But for some people that didn't go that way, as I said, you can use this just to start grinding waves and making progress. My gear is a little bit better than what you'll need to do this, at least starting. So take this with a grain of salt, that if it looks easy for me and it's very hard for you, that doesn't mean a whole lot. I would still expect that you could grind out waves. So I've used up all the DU because I've done the 4 traps on each side. You can also shift this trap a little bit. You can either move it into this triangle here, or if you're having issues with burrowers, you can move it right here too. Just play with where you like it. I generally actually put it in this kind of half square pattern. So that is how I start the map with that build. As I said, I will do another video just going only over the build. Now I'm going to look for the hard lane, which is right in the physical lane, which is actually pretty unfortunate, as you'd like the hard lanes to be in magical where you can do most of your DPS. But for now, we'll just have to deal. So I'm going to start here, but this is where you'll get all your mana, even though you don't do much damage. Do what you can. After this wave, I'll actually show you what I've chosen for Huntress. It's a little bit kind of key to this map. Since you'll be doing anti-air, I use the anti-air spheres. I think at the moment I actually have the charge sphere off. I will turn that back on. This is from a separate build, so know that although I'm not using the charge primary sphere right now, I will actually change that in a minute. If your walls and your other traps are good enough, you pretty much shouldn't have to worry about your side lanes, just the hard lane. You can keep an eye, if something starts flashing, obviously immediately go over there and repair. For the most part, when you're playing solo, you only ever have one hard lane at a time, so really you can focus most of your attention on those hard lanes, unless there's bosses in the other lanes or air. It's key that you focus air, especially if they're flying kobolds. A flying kobold can very easily end your game, but as is, it's pretty standard. One of the reasons why I'm would prefer to use the charge sphere is that versus group play, I generally like to use the range sphere, but I use the charge sphere when I'm doing solo. So a lot of times you're gonna have to be close to the enemies, especially if you're repairing and such. It helps a lot to not have to worry about maximizing your DPS by trying to stand far away. Alright, so that was an easy first wave. Quick clear. Always grab all of the mana before opening the chest. If you open the chest while there's mana on the ground, and solo play, it will disappear. So I open this. I focus on upgrading the walls first. I would probably recommend you do the same. You could get away, depending on how good your walls are, without upgrades. You might be able to get away with upgrading some more of the traps first, but this is the way I prefer it. So in wave 2, you'll start dealing with air. You'll see that air spawns middle, left, and eventually on the right as well. This time the hard lane is middle left, and there will be an ogre coming. This is pretty good for where the hard lane is, because this lane has quite a few more traps than the other lanes. So I'll get started now. I save at least 50 mana for repairs on this map. If you run out of mana and then you die trying to get new mana, it's not good. I forgot to go over my spheres. I'll do that after this wave. I'll also note that I'm not using sticky nades. It's much more important to use, here's the first kobold, to use concussive shot, because with concussive shot you can slow down the damage on the walls. So if your walls are taking a lot of damage, that can actually save you, versus sticky nades, which won't save you. It'll just give you a little bit more damage occasionally, and it doesn't even work on every lane. So again, it's the hard lanes you got to worry about. So right now the hard lane, nothing's spawning, so I'm going to take the time to check the other lanes and bounce back to the hard lane now. You can kind of gauge the flow of the map by the mini-map. If you see a lot of white rushing dots, that probably means you're going to deal with a lot of kobolds coming down a lane, so be aware that you should immediately focus on that, because when the kobolds start rushing, you will take a significant amount of damage. Also add an addendum here. If you see just one flyer spawn, most of the time it will be a flying kobold, which means you want to get there as soon as possible. Now I'll focus on the ogre. On wave 2 you can kind of deal with letting the ogre beat on your walls a little bit, but on wave 5 and 7, if you have double ogres mid, you might have double ogre mid on wave 5, but you will guarantee it on wave 7. You want to make sure that you are there DPSing those ogres. You actually want a hard lane mid for wave 7 and maybe wave 5, so that you don't have to move anywhere to deal with a hard lane and an ogre. The worst would be to have a hard lane left, double ogre mid, and then an ogre on the right. As you can see, I'm playing mostly very close to the barricades so that I can easily repair. And that's why, as I said, I should actually have the charge sphere on. So I will change that right after this ogre dies. Alright. End. So these are the spheres I'm using right now. I'm using the movement speed sphere just to get around quicker. I have the long range sphere on, but I will jump back to the charged primary. You can also, if you're having trouble with the air, you probably want to move to double anti-air. I'll use that for now, but if air isn't an issue for you, go ahead and you can pick pretty much whatever else you want for a medium sphere. Do a quick repair check, grab all the mana, and then come back, and I'm going to upgrade the walls. Make sure you're keeping an eye on your trap health. If you have a lot of low trap health, you either might need a repair, which I really don't recommend, because you're kind of wasting mana on traps, or upgrading the really low ones. So now we'll look at the hard lane as mid again. I'm actually going to put a couple in the physical resist lane, because I'm not going to be able to do very much work here myself, because they'll resist. So I'll come back mid now, and looking at what we have, it actually looks like it's kind of long range stuff, so I'm going to do these two traps. There's burrowers and 3 Draken, and then a bunch of small stuff which I'm not worried about. And with the rest of the mana, I'm going to do 2 in the middle for ogres in the future, and I'll save 50 for repairs. I always try and kill the burrowers first. They will really do the most damage to your walls, not directly, but through making them weaker and buffing up enemies. And now we see like a pretty heavy spawn of air, so I'll focus this for now. Air is always more important than the ground forces. Your Frosty Towers should take care of them if you let a couple past. I recommend not dying. That was just sloppy on my part. Mid didn't have any flying kobolds, and right, since 3 spawn, probably don't have any flying kobolds. So, probably safe to not die. Or if you die there, you're safe. It's as I said, mid, they won't always spawn solo, but on left and right, the flying kobolds generally spawn solo. Mid, you'll usually see flying kobolds sometimes spawn solo, or very frequently spawn in the groups of 5. You can see right now there's a solo left, solo mid, and solo right. You see there's a flying kobold on the left, another flying kobold in the middle, and a flying kobold on the right, I believe, yes. So it's important to note with Ascension Part 2, these skeletons will revive after this wave wherever you kill them. So it's very important to note, if your wall falls and you're still able to kill a skeleton past and survive, then you're going to need to adjust your defenses to account for the fact that that skeleton will revive behind your typical wall placement. If your walls stay alive, you'll have no issues, but just, I've actually lost a couple games where I've forgotten about the revive mechanic. But that really only comes into effect if you lose the wall and the big skeleton gets behind the wall. Once again, after I kill the boss, I'm just focusing on the burrower, the wither beast. And this is just small stuff that should be easy to clean up. Once again, just looking for mana before the round ends, to save time. Looks like I picked up at least most of the green mana. Top left is the hard lane this time, so I usually try and focus my upgrades kind of each round on where the hard lane will be. Always keeping in mind that on wave 7 you will have double ogre mid, so you do want to make sure that your mid is pretty heavily upgraded towards the center, next to the wall, and to some degree this wall too, where you will have an ogre guaranteed on wave 7. Wave 7 is 3 ogres, so it's always important to kind of prepare ahead. Once again, since this is a hard lane, I'm just going to upgrade this stuff. And with the last bit of mana, things like to get stuck right here. So I'm going to use the last 2 here, and 1 right there. So I'm a little bit less than 50, but with the amount I've been repairing, it's not too much. You might need to save more repair mana, depending on how your DPS and traps are working. Just take that into account. Don't, run yourself all the way out. And never underestimate the physical lane. If the physical lane's hard lane, definitely focus, not everything, but a good portion of your upgrades on that wave for that. I've made the mistake of thinking, even when this is a pretty easy map for me to clear, I've made the mistake of losing to hard lanes on the physical lane, because you don't do a whole lot of damage with your hero. And a large component of this is obviously doing damage to the hero. This is a double kobold spawn mid. So they will sometimes spawn double, but it's infrequent. Once again, there's a single kobold left. You can pretty reliably count on, if it's a single spawn, that it's kobold. It's not always, and this mostly applies to this map. Oops, I'm probably dead here, yep. So be careful when you're trying to do that. I should have enough time to respawn and burst down that flying kobold before he does any damage. Even if you lose Frosty Towers to a flying kobold, that's not catastrophic. You really just don't want them to hit your crystal. That's where you run into a lot of trouble. I'll do a wall check real quick where there's nothing at the hard lane. Although there's stuff coming down the hard lane, I'm not too worried about it. I'd probably recommend in the hard lane, either you could do like that, I did a check, or just try to focus on keeping up with the DPS early. It all depends on what level of DPS you're able to put out. You're not really seeing me have to use many of my skills. If these walls were taking more damage, I'd be using my concussive shot a whole lot. If you want to see a more accurate depiction of kind of the difficulty for me, I will be doing a video on solo Gates of Dragonfall and Nightmare Incursion, which that can be very difficult for me to solo, and that'll be more of a accurate depiction of what you should be doing in these situations, but I still want to give you an idea of what this map is like. So this trap's starting to get pretty low, so I'm just going to upgrade it now with my mana. I always try and focus the traps that have the most damage on them, which equates to actually the least number of charges. Whatever has the least number of charges means it's being set off the most and more than likely doing the most amount of damage. You can compare damage numbers between traps, but that gets a little distorted sometimes when you start upgrading things and all that. Alright, so the rest of this mana I'm going to focus on upgrading these traps mid, because as I said, I'm always preparing for the double ogre mid on wave 5, which I have right here, and on wave 7. So it's not guaranteed on wave 5 that you're going to get a double ogre mid like I have here, but it's a pretty good chance. And this is when you run into issues with ogres walking over the mid wall. So I'm going to kind of prepare more for that now by doing this, and then I will DPS them quite a bit myself. I'll start with the Burrower, and then kind of give that lane a break while I go take out the air. The Frosty Towers, as I said, will take care of some of the air, but they can easily be overwhelmed, so it's always good to try and clear as much of the air you can yourself. You do need to have the freeze sphere on, though, really to deal with the air with the apprentice towers. So I would consider going over my video on Frosty Apprentice if you haven't, if you don't kind of know what you're looking for to build in that. When you're DPSing the air mid, where I'm standing right here is a pretty good spot because it actually gives you a view where you're not staring into the sun like you are when you're standing in the middle of the lane. So I'm actually just going to weaken those a little bit and focus on these kobolds that are spawning. You have a pretty good amount of time before kobolds will actually come and do damage. And kobolds even take precedent over dealing with ogres. So now we'll have a double ogre mid, and you should be focusing on the ogres to try and get them down. As I've said in this video and other videos on this map, there is an issue with ogres when two of them bunch up here walking over this wall. If your wall's taking a lot of damage, just spam concussive shot. Don't use sticky nades for this reason. And this way I got lucky in that that ogre on the left, he was frozen by these frostbite towers on the left side. So I never really had two ogres beating on this wall at once. As I said, it's good that I had the hard lane mid too with these, as it makes it easier to control. Oh, and I got a Purge Evil, which I will look at in just a second. It's always a nice feeling to get a Purge Evil, even though you generally don't get what you're looking for with the defense power, but it's always nice to see them drop. I'm going to upgrade these traps, because I mean this one's 37, that one's 47, these are really low. I try and upgrade traps rather than repair them, as I mentioned previously. Let's see this Purge Evil. No, hero crit damage, but 393% is really good, but hero crit damage makes it kind of bad. So that's unfortunate. I expect that, especially if you're starting out, you're going to need to be repairing these sidewalls more in your non-hard lanes, but for me it's not too much of an issue. Again, just go grab your mana, look at what the hard lane is. The hard lane is left on this side, so I'm actually going to spend a little bit more buffing this up. Probably not too much more. I wouldn't do, unless you're absolutely necessary, I wouldn't do too much more than what I have here. And then I'm going to use the rest of this mana to upgrade mid. Because really, I'm always preparing for mid to be hard. That's usually, for me, if I'm going to fail, it will be on wave 7 generally. Because I double ogre mid. And although this is a solo build, this can obviously be done with other people. It would work great if your friends are using DPS hunters as well. It'll just help things go quicker, and you won't have to worry you yourself so much about the air. You can kind of split responsibilities. So actually going to focus on this book back here since there's nothing damaging it and it's just healing everything up here. I'm going to kill this thing and then focus. Oh, see, don't stand on the walls when kobolds are coming. That was stupid of me. That at the wrong time can pretty much be the end of the game for you, so be more careful than I'm being. I'm going to repair that in the meantime, then I'm going to go take care of air. I'd also recommend having service call on your gloves. It helps a lot, just quicker repair speed, and it makes a really significant difference in NM4. And you know, I didn't look mid to see if there are any flying kobolds. I should have. Sometimes those will be mixed in with these groups, and it actually looks like there is one, that it just got sunk to the ground by a... So, what happened here I'll explain in a second while I clear this stuff. You might... Since I'm usually on top of air, I don't mind having these things here. What happened there is one of the bug flying enemies got close enough to this that his attack jumped from this wall over to these frosty towers. So you can play with your frosty tower position a little bit if that's a big issue for you, but I usually catch them in time that it's not. So infrequently that happens that I don't even account for it. Now there's a solo flyer on right, so yes, it's a flying kobold. And just know that losing Frosty Towers isn't the end of the world. Part of the reason for me why Frosty Towers are there is so that they do absorb shots that would have otherwise gone for your crystal. In this case, it wouldn't have with those enemies, but if you're going to lose anything, you want to lose those to flying kobolds, if that's what a flying kobold's going to hit. You prefer even to get to lose a Frosty Tower than be killed by a flying kobold, in my opinion. So this wall looks fine. I'm going to rotate mid now to deal with the bosses. And actually, I misspoke earlier. The Plaguing Hulk doesn't respawn. It is just the Slecky Leon or Skelly Leon, depending on what they're calling them at the time. So I apologize for that. I'm still getting used to the respawning skeletons. I play a lot of Incursion where skeletons don't spawn. So my assumption was Plaguing Hulks respawn as well. And with this build, you kind of have to play a DPS Huntress, versus my other builds where I use a Monk that will do AA for you, because in this build you're almost entirely relying upon AA being yourself. At least for flying kobolds, your Frosty Towers won't generally get the flying kobolds in time. Quick mana collection and repairs. You can see that that wall really didn't even take any damage. So this is wave 7. This is where you get 3 ogres, 2 spawning mid and 1 on the right. Looks like right side is hard, so this is actually going to be a pretty difficult lane because of this being physical resist. So I'm actually going to focus my upgrades in this lane now. I always kind of try to keep my end game in mind, which is this wave, but also upgrade for the given wave. If you can't beat the wave you're on, you're not getting anywhere. I'm going to save this 185 because if I upgrade anything more, I'll drop down to 35, and I don't like that amount of mana. I think that's too little. But actually, I will upgrade one of these traps. I'll upgrade this one since it's the lowest, and that'll leave me with 85. By the start, I'm going to try and focus this burrower down too, even though it's physical resistance. Another thing that I do like about Charge Primary is that it feels like it does more damage to physical resist mobs versus the ranged. I need to go actually deal with anti-air now. You can see that was 2 solo spawns and they were both flying kobolds. There's a flying kobold back mid as well. Can't see it because I'm in the sun. I'm going to move to the side so we can see better. I'm going to look right to check and see what's here. I'm going to come back and repair this because I know it's going to take damage. I was going to use the oil cask on the burrower, but it was already dead by the time I got to focus on it. I also say I never had a hard lane on mid-right here, but when you do make use of engine control to, as you can see right there, blow enemies off the map, it helps actually quite a lot. The only downside of doing that is I don't recommend it on wave 1 if you can possibly avoid it because you lose out on a lot of mana. So if you build pretty much your 1100 DU straight off the bat, be careful. So now it's important that I start focusing on these ogres mid. I probably should have focused on them a little bit earlier even. just in case. But I've actually been getting a little lucky this game, to be honest, with ogres mid, in that they've been getting frozen like that. The longer you can keep the double ogre away from this wall, the better. I'm going to kill this one ogre, and then I'm going to rotate to the bottom right where that third ogre has just now arrived, and I need to check on that wall. So I'll repair that while I'm moving over here, focus this one now. Because air is spawned, I'm going to repair this wall and jump and kill whatever air there is, checking to see if any of them are flying kobolds. If it's not flying kobolds, I'll go back to repairing and DPSing the ogres. So I just got a toxic shock bow. Alright, there's one kobold. Oh, so that was bad. I nearly didn't kill him in time. I didn't kill him in time, actually. You can kind of jump to the sides to get out of the way if you screwed that up. And you know what? I forgot to rebuild those frosty towers. Don't be like me and forget. I always forget frosty towers. I'm terrible about it. When they die, I need someone to remind me most of the time. So, don't forget to rebuild. This is the physical resist lane, so you're better off using your abilities here that are magical, throwing your oil cask first, and then using the piercing shot. I'm just going to go check on left, just to make sure it's fine. Come back here because there's nothing really happening at the wall. And that's pretty much a full clear, guys. If you want to see something that's a little bit more difficult for me, tune into my other video for the NM4 incursion. I'll be filming that right after this, so you can get a better idea of what it's like to play something that's more difficult, how you should be managing things. But I hope this helps everyone. I've kind of tried to give you a running play-by-play of what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, and what you need to be focusing on. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them, and I'll get back to you.